Did you know the process for making paper was invented in China in the 2nd century AD? And that process for making paper changed little over the next 16 centuries. It was one sheet at a time. Until 1798, when that process was revolutionized with the invention of the papermaking machine. Today, there are machines that can make a sheet of paper that's 26 feet wide and nearly 40 miles long in just 1 hour. What is paper? Paper is essentially a mat that's held together by a fiber's roughness. And paper can be made from any fibrous material. But today you are going to review how to make paper from wood, to be exact, from wood fiber. And you will get to make your own sheet of paper.
Hi everybody, my name is Terry Connors. This is Kelly Orm. We're from the University of Kentucky, and we're here today to teach you how to make paper. We're going to do this in a couple different steps. The first thing that I need to do is to review all the materials that you're going to need to have in order to make an effective presentation. I've got things in this tub here in front of me and a couple things here to my left as well. Let me go through what I have right here and bring some of this stuff out for you. The most important thing you're going to have is some way of taking paper or taking wood fibers out of a slurry of fibers and water. What I have here is if you'd hold that for a second, two wooden frames. They're put together with nails on the corners. They're made identically with the exception that one has some window screen that's stapled on the top just like this. This is an ordinary piece of aluminum window screen. It's there to provide a support. Now, to go with that, I have here some forming fabric that I got from the paper company. This is a piece of very fine mesh plastic. The holes are about the same size as the holes in perhaps a lady's stocking. It's a little bit stiffer than that. And there's some alternatives that you can use as well. I've gone down to the hardware store yesterday and I picked up a couple pieces of screen fabric. This is nylon screening. This is ordinary window screen, black nylon, regular mesh, and this is something that's a little bit heavier. It's a little more dense. This is a black nylon shade screen. The specifics I got here, one is called regular charcoal fiberglass screen, charcoal referring to the color. And the second is a super solar screen to help keep the sun out. Either of those are very good substitutes for the forming fabric that I got from the paper company. It's another piece of that. You're going to need something to take the water out of your paper so that the paper can get dried, and there's a two-step process or a three-step process. First, as you'll see in a few minutes, when you take your frames and dunk them in the water with your wood fiber, you're going to have to raise this up. You'll drain a lot of the water away. But paper, when you start off with the wood fiber in the tub, is 99.5% water and only 0.5% wood fiber. So when you drain as much water as you can, you're still leaving a lot of the water behind. The ways you get the rest of the water out is first you're going to press it out, squeeze it out as much as you can like an old-fashioned wringer washing machine. And that's exactly the same thing that paper companies do in their commercial process. The next step we're going to do is we're going to iron it out. We're going to evaporate the water out. And again, that's analogous to what the paper companies do. They dry the paper using very hot steel rolls that they pass the paper over. So let's talk first about how we get the water out through the pressing operation. There's a couple of things we're going to use. I have here some thick polypropylene felts. Again, these come from a paper company. They're used as water receptors. They're very absorbent. They hold a lot of water. Now, you're not going to have access to this in all likelihood, but there are some substitutes that you can use. You could use either blotting paper. You could use several different layers of brown paper towels, or you can go to the craft store and there's this acrylic easy felt type fabric that you're going to have to use 3 or 4 different layers of, but this will serve as the same function. You're going to have a source of wood fiber, and what I've found works very easy is ordinary toilet paper. What I prefer to use is institutional toilet paper. It's already a recycled fiber, which means it isn't very strongly bonded. It breaks apart in a blender quite easily. But there are some options that you can use from the local store. All right, let's start with the Scott and this Angel Soft. Now, the only difference between these two is one is a single ply tissue, and the other is a double ply tissue, which means that when I put this in my blender to break it up, I'm going to use more of one and less of the other. If you have some of your family that's a traveling person, you might be able to get some of this toilet paper from some of the motels or hotels. This particular one is a Caress brand. It's 100% recycled toilet paper. It's 20% post-consumer tissue, which means this part of your toilet paper comes from the paper drives that Boy Scouts have or your civic community collection centers. The other 80% of the recycled fiber comes from the mills themselves. Paper is made on machines about 30 feet wide, and the paper goes at about a mile a minute. So on this 30-foot wide machine, the edges don't end up with paper that is as uniform weight and sometimes has kind of a crinkly edge. That gets trimmed off. It doesn't get sold to the consumer. But instead of going to the landfill, that part of the paper gets recycled. It goes down into the pit, gets slushed up again, and gets reused into this recycled paper we have right here. It doesn't go back into the premium toilet paper product because it doesn't bond as easily. It's not as soft. So it goes back into the lower class paper. Okay, so we've talked about the boxes that we use. We've talked about the forming felt. You're going to need a rolling pin in place of grandmother's old-fashioned wringer washing machine. And you're going to need an iron. We'll talk about that again in a second. There are a couple other things that I have here. I've got a gallon of pulp already made up. And I've got a couple other miscellaneous things. Oh, I did forget one thing. In place of the felts, another thing that you could use is these painter's towels. They're nice and smooth. You're looking for something very soft, very water absorbent to help get the water out of that paper before you try to dry out the iron. I use the funnel to put the pulp into my can. Finally, I have some wood chips, and we'll make sure that some of these wood chips are in every kit that we send out. These wood chips are about the size of a postage stamp, if you'd hold that for a second. If you have a wooden ruler, you might try to just compare the size of the wood chips to the inch markings. This is a fairly large wood chip. It's about the size of an inch. But some of these others are a little bit smaller, maybe a ½ inch by ½ inch. And the biggest of these is about the same thickness as that wooden ruler. So the whole challenge of making paper is to go from a very thin wood chip, just like this, to something that's very, very flexible in order to make paper. And we'll talk about that. Now, one of the little props that I have here that I like to use, and it's not going to be included in your kit, is an ordinary Dove pan I got from a magic shop. When I talk through my demonstration in front of children or adults and tell them how to make paper, I say, well, when you make paper, you have to start out with a tree, and you take all the limbs off, you take all the leaves off, you leave those behind. The log gets loaded onto a truck, gets taken to the paper company. The first thing the paper company does is it takes off all the bark, because bark creates dirt in paper. We've all seen paperback books or tissue that has a little bit of brown speck on there that comes from bark that escaped through the process. So now you've got this skinned tree that ends up going to a chipper, where all these chips are fashioned. They're not sawn out, they're actually chipped out. And those chips get cooked up to make them soft. It's sort of like if you have an old-fashioned pressure cooker, if you do canning, you're trying to make beans at home. You add those beans, or in this case our wood chips, add some water, then you screw on a lid with a special gasket and you put it on the fire to cook those beans. Paper cooking is sort of the same thing, except now our pressure cooker is called a digester. It's many stories tall. You add your water, you add your chips, you add some other chemicals to help make the chips softer, like a sodium sulfate or whatever. Then you're going to put the lid on the digester and you're going to cook it for a while. Now in my demonstration I have a little person here usually says, okay, I want you to say the magic words, hocus pocus alakazam, and give it a good rap.
Abracadabra!
Give it a good rap. Okay, see now I've turned my wood chips into wood pulp. This is just an ordinary magic Dove pan. This is a preset type of thing. So the wood chips are actually in here. But it makes a nice little buzz, and if you close this up real quickly and don't let anyone focus on it, you can talk about, all right, now you've got brown wood pulp. How come this is brown wood pulp but you get white paper in your textbooks and so forth? You get to talk about how the pulp is washed, get rid of the chemicals, and how extra color is washed away at the same time, but it's still brown. So then it has to go through a several-step bleaching process in order to turn it into white paper like we have here. So that gives me the chance then to go through the whole process. Now that's all the props that we need to do this, but I did want to go through, this is my tub, by the way. This is actually what I'm going to use to make the paper, and this is a sweater keeper that you can buy from Walmart or something like that. And this is where I'm going to put my pulp and my water. I'm going to use about a gallon of pulp that I mix up to about 6-7 gallons of water You're going to have to fiddle with the proportions a little bit depending on how thickly you actually make your pulp consistency. Let me show you a little bit how to actually make the pulp in a blender. What we're going to do is I'll take a roll of toilet paper, and I'm actually going to drop this on the floor. It's just easier to unroll it that way. And I'm going to use my arms outstretched once, twice, 3, that's 4, let's do 5 times. This is a double ply tissue paper. And I'm going to put this in the blender. Now I'm going to add water. This blender, I'm going to fill this up to about 48 ounces with the water that I put in there. There we go. I don't want it full all the way because I don't want it to overflow. This particular lid has a strainer, has an opener, has a closed side. I want the closed side over here by this lip. If I forget and put it on another way, it's going to explode out the edge. So I'll put that down there. Now all I'm going to do is pulse this for 5, 10, or 20 seconds. It'll break it up. And we're done. If I wanted to do that longer, I'd end up with a thicker or a denser paper perhaps, but I don't need to go any further than that. At this point, all I have to do is get myself an empty milk jug and a funnel and pour it in. When you're preparing to do paper making demonstrations, you're going to start off with about a gallon of pulp like this in a tub like this with that 6 or 7 gallons of water like I talked about. But if you're making more than just 1 or 2 sheets of paper, you're going to need at least 2 gallons and as many as 4 gallons of pulp to last you through the day, depending on how many people you're going to be explaining this to, how many pieces of paper you're going to be taking out of your pulp. Every time you make paper, you're removing some of your original stock, and you've got to replenish that throughout the demonstration. So let me go through now and just familiarize you with the process involved in making paper. It'll be a little bit more easy for you, become a little bit more second nature to you when you're making the presentations yourself. Let's take our wooden frames and assemble them with my forming fabric. The whole assembly I'm going to have down here is called a decal box. I'm going to start up by taking my wooden frame with the window screen stapled at the top, and I'm going to take my forming fabric and place that flat on top, square it up all the edges all the way around. Then I take my empty screen, and that makes the top layer. So this comprises my decal box, wooden frame, metal window screen, my forming fabric, which might be a piece of window screen that you buy, and then this blank screen up here on top. And I'm going to squeeze this all together and hold it all square. Now, when you're making paper, I have my tub of pulp right here, which is about 1 gallon of the pulp and about 6.5 gallons of water. Again, you can probably see I've got some pulp down here in the bottom. This is what I'm after. This is what I want to try to remove from the rest of the water. All the water is necessary in order to help get a very smooth, even layer of pulp spread across the screen here. But again, I'm basically doing a sifting operation. When you're starting to make paper, all this is settled at the bottom. It's going to have to get mixed up. Now, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take your decal box, squeeze it together pretty tightly with your thumb on the wood and your fingers on the wood here. You don't want your fingers wrapped around the back side. Keep them on the wood, squeezing it together. Get your elbows nice and limber. You're going to lean forward, dip it in the water at an angle. Now that's important. If I dip this decal box in the water just like this, what I'd have is an air bubble showing up right here in the middle, and that would end up putting a hole in my paper. So what I'm going to do is dip this in the water at an angle, let the air bubbles escape. There they go. Swirl back and forth 2 or 3 times, get this pulp all mixed up. And I'm down near the bottom of the tub, just an inch or so off. I'll bring it back to center, again keeping it low near the bottom. You can probably see the swirling from the fibers as they're all mixed up. When that swirling slows down, like it is now, I'm going to lift this up flat. I wait for the swirling to slow down because that helps keep the fiber uniformity on the screen. And there's the water. I don't tilt it towards one corner right away. If I did that immediately, all the fiber would slump from this corner down here and I wouldn't have a piece of paper anymore. I'd have a wedge for a doorstop. So there's the paper we just made. That's not ready to write on. What we have to do next are two operations. We have to press this, then we have to finish drying this with evaporation. So let me show you the first step. Let's go through and press this. I'm going to take one of these pieces of felt that I've got right here. I'm going to put it on this plywood board. Plywood is here to protect the woods or the tabletop surface underneath. I'll be ironing on this in just a little bit, and this keeps the heat from ruining the granite top. So I'm going to take this piece of paper I made with the forming fabric side down, the paper side up, put it on top of that felt or blotting paper, whatever you're using. Thank you. I'm going to take a piece of brown paper towel and I'm going to lay this down on here. Now, the color is not important. The color that I chose was brown because I'm going to transfer this paper onto this piece of brown paper towel. I'll hold it up, and everyone in my audience can see the white paper against the brown paper towel background. So I'm going to lay this down next. Then another piece of blotting paper or felt or whatever you choose to use, just like that. Now I'm going to use my magic rolling pin, and I'm going to press this from side to side, edge to edge. It's important that you don't be too gingerly about it, and you don't want to really muscle it down either. If you muscle it too hard, you'll actually create waves in the paper. You're not going to get a uniform product out of this. So edge to edge, side to side, however you want to describe it. Firm and gentle, just like that. Just like making biscuits is what I tell the kids. Now we're going to disassemble this, and if we're lucky, the paper will stick to this brown paper towel. It'll peel off that forming fabric pretty easily. You see I've pushed water all the way through the backside of that felt. That's good. That means I did a pretty good job with my rolling pin. Now we're going to just coax this off. Usually it comes off pretty well, just a corner. There you go. I might have pressed just a little hard. I can see a couple waves there. That'll disappear when I press this out with the iron. Now I need another piece of paper towel, because the next step I have to do is to iron this off to get it dry. I put this between two pieces of paper towel because if I put the iron directly on my wet paper, it would scorch it. This helps to protect it. So there we go there, and I'm just going to iron this off. And you'll see a lot of steam come up in just a minute.
You want to make sure that you do not have an automatic shut-off iron. That way that when you're doing this, the iron won't shut off during the project.
That's a really good point. If you've gotten this all laid out and you plug the iron in first thing, by the time you get at this point, your iron's already going to be cold. Or if you're making paper continuously for a whole day like I do sometimes, you'll be plugging that iron in and out all day. So buy the cheapest iron you can. I think I spent $8 for this one at Walmart. And you don't want that automatic shut-off feature. That's exactly right. So this is sort of the reverse of ironing your shirt. The slower you go, the faster it dries. You don't have to worry about it scorching. Remember, water always goes towards the cold surface, so the other side right now is actually a little bit wetter. I'm going to take this and I'm going to flip it over. Normally I flip this over several times on the process of ironing this paper out. This is the point where I usually get a chance to talk to people about recycling paper. I say, well, I started today with recycled paper. Who knows how come it's important to recycle paper? Usually everyone says, well, it's important to recycle paper so we don't have to cut down so many trees. People don't learn about why it's important to recycle. They just get the message that they should, you see. And we don't really have to worry about recycling because of cutting down trees. We have more trees today than we had in 1920. It's always a point that I make that we plant on average in this country 5 trees for every one we cut down. We plant 5 trees for every one we cut down on average. Some companies plant more, some plant a little bit less, but that's the average. So I always say, okay, if we plant 5 trees and we're cutting down one, the forest getting bigger, the forest getting smaller. And I think about it for a second, the littlest one usually raises her hand and says the forest getting bigger. So, okay, we've demonstrated that we don't have to worry about recycling to save trees. What's another reason? Well, then I started talking about spelling tests. I said, how many of you had a spelling test that you came home with and you only had a C or a B? And your mother looked at you and said, well, I'm glad you got a C or you got a B, but you can do better next time. She takes that spelling quiz, she puts it on the refrigerator. But she's not really all that proud of that B or the C. She knows you can do better. So it stays there for a couple days, and then where does it go? Where does your exam go? And they say, oh, it goes to the trash can. That's right. Where does the trash can go? It goes to the dumpster, and the dumpster goes to the landfill. Ah, you see, now we're getting somewhere. Over a third of all the material in the landfill is made out of paper. So if all your tests, all the newspapers, other things that you do not recycle, if you put them right in the trash can, if they all end up in the landfill, what's going to happen? Well, of course, the answer is we have to get new landfills. And you don't want to have a landfill next to you, do you? No, you don't want to put a new landfill next to you. No, no one I've ever talked to wants to have a new landfill in their next door. So that's why it's important to recycle, so we don't have to make any more of these new landfills. And by the time I get through this little speech like that, my paper is usually dry, and we can peel this apart. Then I can pass it around, have them write their name on it, or whatever you choose.
It's really cool.
You want to try making some?
Sure.
All right.